Today, we're going to do some myth busting about grief. I have selected the 6 myths of grief that I feel are the most harmful and the most common traps when considering how to do grief. This comes from my personal experience of grief and from the experience of supporting others with their own grief. I'm Joe McRogers. Welcome to Grief Support That Works. I'm really glad you found us. Myth number 1, time heals all. Only one word comes to my mind, and that is bullshit. How do I know this? Because I lived for many years in a dark and limited and sometimes dangerous mindset while I was grieving, just hoping for time to cure it all. And I can reassure you that it didn't. I also observe that many of the clients that come to my therapy practice will tell me that they've had my card in their wallet for over a year. And this means then that grief has had an extended time and grip on their lives. So there is now more work to be done as grief reactions have become habits and then patterns. The final reason why I know that this is a myth is that while sitting with people about a current or most recent grief, the losses from the past inevitably become reactivated. Unsupported grief risks becoming a trauma lens. Time does not heal all. Myth number 2, grief comes in stages. Wrong. This myth appeals to us because our brains try to make things linear, but there is nothing linear about grief. The ever popular 5 Stages of Grief, written by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, was meant to support those who've been given a terminal diagnosis, not the grief of loss as grievers. It makes me crazy how many current references are still being made to the 5 stages of grief. Her work was brilliant, but it has been misplaced as we try to make grief linear. This is what we want grief to look like. And this is what grief actually looks like. I'm going to ask for a show of hands in the comment section below. How many of you were directed to the 5 stages of grief when experiencing loss? Myth number 3, the first year is the hardest. Again, not true. And I offer this up with hesitancy for those of you who are still in the first year of loss, but I want you to know that when the second year hits and you feel like things somehow impossibly just got harder, that is accurate. That is an actual truth. It is not a measure of you doing your grief wrong. Year 1 to year 2 can best be described as going from busy to quiet. All the tasks are done. Eulogies are written, burials have been arranged, church services have been conducted, Shiva has been sat, credit cards have been canceled, insurance claims have been made, sometimes closets have been cleaned, or rooms have been repurposed. First year success with our grief shows up in these tasks. We can be deceived to think that this is our grief work, that this is how we mourn. And then year 2 shows up and none of these metrics apply. The business of death has been completed. The doing of it is seductive. The next question is, year 2, now what? It is always a shock when the doing ends and the being begins. The being with the emotions. The being with grief begins, and it is 1,000 times more challenging than the doing of loss. Myth number 4. There's a strong belief that the goal of grief is closure. Seeking closure often looks like seeking answers to why and how did this happen to me, the getting past the funeral. The getting past the first timestamps of the first year will bring closure. Getting signs of normal, such as returning to work, having another baby, moving homes, cleaning closets, dating. Again, wrong. These are false hopes of closure. How do any one of us close out the love and the life that we shared with someone who has died? As though it never happened. What an emotional setup. I instead look to the energy and emotion of integration. How do I live fully with this loss in my heart? I feel it is imperative to live not through your loss, not in spite of your loss, but with your loss beside you. Integration is the goal. How do I live with this wound comes first. And then how do I live well with this wound comes next. Myth number 5. All too often, people who love us will make loving suggestions that are so far off the mark that it can be harmful. One of the myths that is often promoted is to keep busy. Keep busy, it will help. Not helpful advice. The core of grief work is being able to create safe and supportive ways to quietly be with your grief. Distraction and diversion are helpful tools, but they are not a strategy. Grief work involves creating what is called pendulation, being able to lean into the hard emotions and then being able to lean out for some respite. I speak about this in the video that I named Signs That You May Be Avoiding Your Grief. How many of you were told to keep busy? Occupy your mind. Try not to think about this. Get yourself out. Now, maybe I'm being really hard on this myth, but please let me know in the comments if being busy as a sole strategy helped you out. Myth number 6. This one is completely false. You need to be strong. And I know in my earlier days that I have muttered this to people in the past, but I have now learned not to. What choice do they have? This is not helpful advice. And then it's often made worse by saying, oh, he would have wanted you to be strong, or she would want you to be happy. Rather than being strong, what you actually need to be is vulnerable. Be clear about this change in your life. Be aware of your strengths and challenges to meet this time of grief. Be vulnerable enough to form a relationship with your grief. Find ways that work for you beyond just grunting your way through it. Jaw clenched. Supported vulnerability can be your superpower in grief. So today I've shared some thoughts about my most loathed myth. What is your most hated myth about grief? Please comment below. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss the next video that I post where I speak about truths about grief. Also, please consider becoming a member of our online supportive community called the Grievolution Collective. There'll be a short video after this one. And as you work to take the myths out of your grief experience, I send you kind thoughts, kind words, and a kind heart. Thank you, and take good care.